what we want is to have short lead times as short as possible, right? We also want to be able to smooth out the demand and have our resupply to be as reliable as possible, right? So it's never we place an order, we're not sure if it's gonna get there in time or, right? And all those things, both of those things allow us to kind of get away from having to rely on these long-term forecasts that always turns out to be not wrong, right? To some degree, you can have a better and better forecast, but it'll never be reality. You're always going to be off from what the reality is. So that allows us to get away from using forecasts, and it allows us to respond to actually what's happening, what the actual demand is that we see at the point of sales. So we'll come back to this. So far, so good. All right. So before we kind of move on to talk a little bit more about the changes in detail. Satish, we're going to be, last time we talked about the vicious cycle, so this time we're going to talk a little bit about the evaporating cloud or conflict clouds. Right? Have you guys seen Zoolander? No? Well, so in the movie, Owen Wilson's kind of an idiot, right? And somebody tells him to go get some files, and he's looking at this thing like, where are the files? And they're like, it's in the computer. So he takes the computer and smashes it on the ground. He's like, where all the files go? He goes, it's so simple, it's in the computer. But, if just last time in the vicious cycle session, we spent less than 1 hour, right? We were in it for like 20 minutes. All we had basically was a basic understanding of how distribution systems work and some logic, some sense, right? And we all came to the conclusion, what we just discussed, having debatching and having shorter lead times and having a pull instead of a push system. So it makes sense, and it seems quite simple, right? Ellie even named his book that's on retail. It's called "Isn't It Obvious?" But it's clearly not obvious to the companies that are dealing with this situation. So the question is why? If I took that vicious cycle that we drew, and I went to like executive and I showed him that, there's a chance he might be convinced and say, okay, and now I get it. We want to make these changes, but there's also a pretty high probability that he'll say, no, like it can't be done, right? We can't implement this. Why? Because when we see that there is a solution, but it's not being implemented, a lot of times there's a conflict that exists that's blocking the implementation of that solution. Right? So when we talk about the evaporating cloud or a conflict cloud, it has several different names. It's a way for us to understand what the conflict is first of all, so that we can talk about the right things, right? And remove the conflict that is there, so that people are convinced that this is the right thing to do. It's not a yes but kind of situation.